It's a dark and stormy night, and you're on an aircraft that's getting ready to land. Are you nervous? If not nervous, are you at least a little bit curious about how the pilots up front are actually going to find this runway on a day like this? With this speech, I'm going to introduce you to the Instrument Landing System. I'll call it ILS for short from here on in. As a professional pilot, this is something I use on a very regular basis. I chose to speak on it because a lot of people get nervous when they fly. Well, hopefully by giving you a little bit of insight into this one piece of aviation safety technology, it will allay at least some of those concerns and make for a more enjoyable trip for you or a loved one. Any discussion of the ILS has to contain the three aspects that make the system work, and that is the equipment on the ground, the equipment in the aircraft, and the pilot who's monitoring both of those systems to make sure everything's functioning properly and safely. So let's take this quite literally from the ground up and see if I can manage to give you an idea of how it all works. Before I get into it, I'll tell you I will be paraphrasing and putting in layman's terms information that I've drawn from the Aeronautical Information Manual and the Instrument Flying Handbook. So both FAA publications, you can find them on the FAA website, but they're a little bit technical in nature, so that's hence the paraphrasing and putting them in common speak, if you will. Now, the main components of the, let me grab my props here. The main components of the ILS are the localizer and the glide slope. The localizer is a radio signal that gives signals left and right, and the glide slope is a signal that gives guidance up and down. If you put them together, you get kind of a cross, and they'll move independently of one another based on someone's position in the sky. If you think of them as a funnel, the idea is to bring this aircraft that is up at the top of the funnel and get it down to a point where it is above the runway, and obviously not all the way to the ground, but to a point low enough that it can sight the runway and be below the clouds and go ahead and land just visually. So I put that down there. Now pretty much that covers the ground equipment, so how is everybody going to be able to see this in the aircraft as far as the pilots are concerned? To make use of the technology, an aircraft has to be equipped with a certain kind of receiver to be able to receive the signals from the ground. Almost all aircraft have this. If they do not, they pretty much cannot go flying on a cloudy day. They have to stay out of the clouds. But aircraft receive the transmissions from the ILS components on the ground and present them in such a way so they can be understood and acted upon by the pilots. Now, most aircraft also have an autopilot system that can be programmed to fly the path of the ILS if the pilot desires it to do so. And speaking of the pilot, we've now covered the engineering aspect of this. Let's cover the human element, the pilot. The pilot's job is to monitor the aircraft throughout the process by either directing the autopilot functions or flying the airplane by hand if the situation dictates. And pilots have specific published procedures for a particular runway. Now that just means you aren't going to just land on any runway, you're going to land on the specific one. There's a radio frequency you have to tune in, and there are specific altitudes that may be safely flown. When they reach that minimum altitude, the pilot either initiates a missed approach, goes around, tries it again, or he visually sights the runway, he or she of course, visually sights the runway, goes ahead and lands. All right, well that's it. We've made it. We've gone from the ground to the sky, and now we're back down again in only a few minutes. So remember, the ground equipment, the aircraft equipment, and the pilot, they all come together to make even a bad weather day just another day at the office, if you will. So the next time you find yourself nervous about a flight and the weather isn't ideal, know that you've got two very highly trained and capable pilots working with one of the most reliable and safe methods for getting aircraft safely down to the ground and onto the runway. With that in mind, sit back and relax, because either I or one of the fellow pilots in the industry will have you on the ground very shortly. Thank you very much, and I hope you learned something.